welcome everyone. So as Bill mentioned, we're going to have a conversation tonight about the status of roadway safety here in the U.S. Of course, you've been following the news. There's been a whole bunch of developments lately. Some grant awards came out, some more information about safety statistics, and we're kind of going to go through some of that tonight and see kind of what it all means. But first, I want to start out just if you don't know what Build the Era or who we are, I just want to tell folks that, a little bit about us. We're an education and advocacy organization focused on transportation and infrastructure as it relates to US DOT. We're volunteer founded and volunteer powered by supporters, volunteers, and staffers from Secretary Pete, then candidate Pete Buttigieg's 2020 presidential campaign. And our purpose is to connect citizens from across America to US DOT by educating and informing the public as to what US DOT does and it doesn't do, and why it matters, to educate and inform the public to the role that infrastructure plays in America's quality of life, provide training and guidance on how to engage local and federally elected officials on matters related to US DOT initiatives, provide training and guidance on how to advocate for causes using relational organizing as a primary tool, and to create measurable change. That's really our goal, is we're looking to activate, motivate people, and to actually see some things change for the better. So that's a little bit about us. But the topic we're here to talk about right now is road user safety. And really, we can't talk about that without talking about the crisis that we have here in America, the road user death crisis. And I thought this was kind of a perfect example. I'll show you a little bit where this map actually came from. It's part of the new tools that US DOT actually put out there for people to actually visualize, how much of a crisis this is. This is every single dot that you see there, and this is kind of like the industrial Midwest. Every single dot that you see, it represents a fatal crash between the years of 2016 and 2020. And so, you can see the clusters around, the cities, but you see a whole lot of dots outside those cities. So crashes can happen everywhere, and they do. And just to give you some statistics here, between 2011 and 2022, over 350,000 users died on US roads and streets. And in 2021, there were 42,915 road user deaths. And that was a 10.5% increase over 2020, which was a spike in itself. And now that was in 2021, that was the highest number since the mid-2000s. And pedestrian fatalities increased to over 7,000. That was a 13% change. And cyclist fatalities increased to almost 1,000. And that was about a 5% change. Texas had the most road user deaths with over 4,500. That was an 18% change for them. And California had the second most with over 4,200, and that was about an 11% change for them. And if you combine just those two states, they represent over 20% of the road user deaths in the U.S. in 2021. Rhode Island and Alaska actually had the fewest road user deaths with 67, but that was actually an increase for Alaska, while Rhode Island held the same. And the largest percentage increase for a state was in Idaho, where they were over 33%. And the largest percent decrease was actually in Wyoming, where their road user deaths dropped by 11%. So that's a snapshot of basically where the last full data set that we had in 2021. So just to look at where we are at on the world stage, this was taken in 2019. This is the road user death traffic rate per 100,000 population. And just to point out some of these countries, you have Sweden here, you have the UK, you have the Netherlands, and then you have Australia. And all of those countries have a road user death rate below 5. And then you're looking for the United States, we're over here at over 12. And this was 2019 before we had the spike. So I think we can all imagine that we're probably not even on this page right now for what we have. And really, that's unacceptable. I think we all know that. We all know that we've got to get to zero. These other countries are well ahead of us, but and they're saying that what they've got is unacceptable. So we definitely need to do something to get to zero. So not only is there that human cost, but there's an actual financial cost to this as well. This was taken in 2020 from the National Safety Council. These are the figures they came up with here, but if you look at these figures and kind of multiply that by the number of road user deaths back in 2021, that's over $75 billion worth of economic loss. So, this is truly a crisis, both in the human sense and the financial sense. So we've seen what 2021 looks like. We've seen kind of where we were. Now let's see kind of what we've had back in 2022. And this headline here from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, it's promising news, but if we're leveling off, that means we're still around 40,000 user deaths, and that's still unacceptable. But let's take a kind of a dive into the data here. And this is right from the report that they issued. And there's some trends here. You can see between 2021, this is a snapshot taken from January to June of 2022. And we can see it really has pretty much remained constant. There was a slight increase for that 6 months, but it pretty much has remained on the same pace as 2021. Some other trends here, which are interesting to see, and I'm not sure, let's go back here, is kind of looking at the age group. The number of folks, the percentage under 34 was actually down over those first 6 months of 2022, while there was a slight increase for folks over 35 in terms of the fatal crashes or fatalities. So it's just interesting to see the trends, to see if that will hold over time. Like I said, it's promising news that we're seeing a decrease and an overall holding steady, but still completely unacceptable that it's this many deaths on our roads. So looking at that data, we need to, it's pretty obvious kind of why we need to have a national roadway safety strategy. So let's get into that just a little bit. This was something that, based on, you've seen that 2021 data, so we really needed some sort of action to take action. And so USDOT came up with this National Roadway Safety Strategy. It was introduced in January of last year, and it really said for the first time that zero road user deaths is the vision of USDOT. It was kind of in the language, things like that, but never had something like this had come out, that zero is the only acceptable answer. In this strategy, there was also the formal adoption of a safe system approach, and we'll review that here in a second. But as the Biden administration also saw this as another opportunity to address climate inequity in this strategy, and USDOT itself committed itself to multiple actions, and we're actually going to take a look and see kind of where they're at 1 year later. So first, let's talk a little bit about the safe system approach. This is something that's been around for quite a while. Actually, from 2004 to 2017, it was described in multiple reports, both by the Organization for Cooperation and Development and the World Health Organization. And as those countries that I had pointed out earlier on that kind of the world stage and where we were, Sweden, UK, the Netherlands, and Australia all adopted that safe system approach. And we can see the results that they've had. As I mentioned, the US had incorporated parts of it, but really hadn't adopted the whole thing until 2022 as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law. So these are the principles here, the 6 principles of the safe system approach: that death and serious injury is unacceptable, humans make mistakes, humans are vulnerable, responsibility is shared, safety is proactive, and redundancy is critical. Or sorry, redundancy is crucial. So I think that's kind of common sense things, but really when you look at all of those together, it really is kind of a major change in the thinking of the way that we look at our highway system and design and look at education and how we've been going about things, really ever since we built up our national system. And then you have the 5 elements of the safe system approach, and you have safe road users, safe roads, safe speeds, safe vehicles, and post-crash care. So with that, we've got these 5 elements, we've got the 6 principles, and that really informs that National Roadway Safety Strategy. That's really the backbone of it. And everything is kind of really based around the safe system approach on how we can look at the various pieces of that and implement that to make things and to try to get to zero, realistically. So let's take a look a little bit and see how exactly things have been going so far in that implementation. And for that, go back one here. For that, if we go to this website, transportation.gov, NRSS/implementation, we get to this page that talks all about the implementation of the National Roadway Safety Strategy. And as folks who follow Secretary Pete, before he became Secretary Pete, knew that while as mayor of South Bend, he really liked dashboards to show the public, exactly where they were actually at and where, these public agencies and how they were performing. So now we have a dashboard to track the National Roadway Safety Strategy, the actions that USDOT is taking. So if we click this, go in here, we can see this dashboard here. And this has every single action that USDOT has committed to, the agency that's actually going to be the lead, and then there's a target completion date, and then there's different phases here on each quarter where this particular action is at. So if we look at this one here, this one's addressing risky driver behavior. So we can see here, if we look at the green, this says in progress. The actual target completion date's 2024. So, excuse me, that this hasn't been completed yet. It's still in progress. So, we probably won't see the complete ongoing, probably starting in 2023, 2024. So let's go down and take a look at some other ones here. And now we've actually got a couple that are either completed or in progress. And these are ones. This is developing proposals to update consumer information on vehicle safety performance. So that was one that I think was in the news a little bit, especially about updating the new car assessment program as well, that NCAP roadmap, to show how those vehicle improvements will be advanced over the next 10 years. So again, that's now in progress. This one it was in the news a little bit too, about the rear impact guards. As we can see, there's now a rulemaking effort underway to upgrade those requirements. And you can search this whole dashboard here. You can look at the action type. You can look at the actual, which area it actually applies to. So it's broken down by those 5 areas. And then you have the lead agencies that you can look at. So say if we wanted to just look at safer roads. So these are all the initiatives that USDOT is committed to for safer roads. So again, this is a great tool. This is something I think, we're going to continue to track, and the public can continue to track and really hold USDOT accountable in terms of, meeting what they said they were going to do. So, I think given that this is out there and the public can see this, you can see the seriousness of the agency willing to take this on and have this have all these actions completed. So looking back, and again, that's the website here. So looking back at that, we have the implementation of the National Roadway Safety System, but we also have some of the things that they actually did to try to highlight, this road user death crisis for the public, and to make it, to let folks visualize it more. And for that, you can go to this website here, transportation.gov /NRSS/safety problem. And you see they've got it here, the roadway safety problem, and they've created this story map in ArcGIS. And this is just, I'll show you exactly, all of the data that you can access here. So again, this was one here. Let me zoom out. Actually, let me go to the top here so you can see it. So yeah, so this is where it begins. Talks about the roadway safety crisis. Really, defines it. Again, lists that 42,915 figure that is just so sobering. And right there, this is unacceptable. Everybody at USDOT, this is what they are saying now. That 0 is the only acceptable number. So there's a map here for hotspots of all the crashes. And so you can see, again, they're kind of focused around the urban areas, but you do see there is some, shading here. And like I said, when you zoom in, you start to see all the dots. And, it really is all across the country where we've had, both in urban and rural situations where we've had fatal crashes. And you can click on each dot and you can see the actual crash, the time of day, and you can actually get a Google Street View of the location of the crash. So then we see concentration of roadway fatalities. So you actually see the roadway of fatalities by county. Again, since 2016, each county and the average county has experienced, almost 60 fatalities. And that's 11 fatalities per county per year. And then you can actually take a look and see how your county compares to other counties here in the US. And then you have the fatality rate versus the population. So the yellow shows the high fatality rate, but fewer people. So you can see again, no part of it, it's all across the country. And this is where USDOT is really targeting these counties with the high fatality rates. And even my state here, you can zoom in Hancock County. For a population of only 55,000, you have 53 fatalities. So the fatality rate's above 19 here. So, even every state's got work to do to bring this down. And then you have fatality rate versus population. So again, lots of information here. I encourage folks to go through this, look through this. There's just, and this is one of the greatest things here that they put in. People are saying Vision Zero is impossible, but here are all the cities and towns with at least 5,000 people that have had 0 fatal crashes for 1 year. And you can see there's a bunch of dots on here. So it is possible. And we can turn, this map green. We can get more green dots on here if we can commit to a strategy and all, buy into it and take action to get there. Because these cities and towns have done it. So this was to me, this was one of the most important things they could have done, was to actually show that the Vision Zero was, we heard about New Jersey, but this is all over the country that these cities and towns have achieved this. So to me, this is one of the most important things in this whole story map. So again, I'd encourage folks to take a look at that. Another thing that that we've seen recently is that as part of the National Roadway Safety Strategy, there's been a call to action, and USDOT recently issued that call to action to join first movers as allies in action to help move the U.S. to zero road user deaths. There are 49 of these organizations and companies that have joined on to this, including AASHTO, AAA, the Governor's Highway Safety Association, the League of American Bicyclists, Uber, UPS, and the Vision Zero Network, to name a few. And you can go onto the National Roadway Safety Strategy website and see the rest of these first movers. And I'm happy to report that Build the Era will be joining Allies in Action with our action plan. And we're going to be providing more information how you can join us and get involved in that. So we're excited to be joining this effort very soon. So again, in the news, trying to get to zero in the bipartisan infrastructure law, there was a new program established called the Safe Streets and Road for All Grant Program. And this past year in 2022, there was $800 million available, and they were just awarded to 510 communities across the country. There are 37 implementation grants and 473 action plan grants. So you got 37 projects that are actually going to be, we're actually going to see some movement there. And then you actually have 473 action plans in various states where organizations like municipal planning organizations are actually taking a look at how can we get to zero? What is our plan? What are we going to do for projects, for education, or what are we going to do to get us to zero? And that number, that funding number, increases to 1.1 billion for 2023. So there's a huge investment in this compared to in the past. And we've seen that cities and municipalities, now state DOTs are not actually eligible to apply for this, but cities, municipal planning organizations, towns, different organizations can apply for these grants and come up with their own ideas for how we can get to zero. So, and I should point out too, here, if you go to transportation.gov/grants/SS4A/2022 awards, you can see all of the awards again across the country of where people are taking action and where either an implementation grant was awarded or a planning grant. So with that, there's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of actions USDOT is taking, but I kind of look at this and I see a lot of things that USDOT could do that aren't part of their action plan that they have committed to, nor some of the organizations out there have committed to. And for those who know me, this shouldn't come as a surprise. Number one is really roundabouts, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the other is to reorganize the proven safety countermeasures, and I'll talk about exactly kind of why that would be so important. Another thing that I've really stressed is road user education, and especially at an elementary school level. There are some organizations across the country that are doing this. One of the most notable would be in Philadelphia, where they have Safe Routes Philly has got a great program, and we'd like to see more of that. And then rewriting the Uniform Vehicle Code to be a Uniform Traffic Code. I'll talk about that here in a second. And rewriting parts of the AASHTO Green Book to be equitable for vulnerable road users. And we'll talk about that here. But first, roundabouts, they're not yet a preferred intersection type for federal highway. And it kind of boggles my mind a little bit, because when I look at the statistics and see that over 3,000 users die at signalized intersections each year, and over 900 of them are actually cyclists and pedestrians, it just kind of, seeing the statistics for roundabouts, the fact that they reduce, fatalities by 90%, and for pedestrians and cyclists, the actual number of road user deaths is basically, the last time I heard it was around like 11, in terms of the entire span of when roundabouts first were implemented in this country back in the 1990s, compared to this, 900 a year. I mean, you look at that, and that's pretty sobering. And they're not actually listed as a proven safety countermeasure for pedestrians or cyclists, even though they've been proven to reduce fatalities and serious injuries from road users. And as a consequence, Federal Highway, there was a guidance that they just issued recently to states about vulnerable road user safety. And because they weren't part of that pedestrian cyclist category, they were not recommended in that guidance. So the other thing that I've noticed too is that Federal Highways hasn't really done a whole lot to promote roundabouts. And it was interesting, during this last National Roundabouts Week, they had done some of the least out of any organization or agency participating. I'm proud to say that we actually had one of the highest social media presences for roundabout information during that week. So shout out to us for that. And Secretary Pete himself, he has mentioned them in one occasion when he visited a project in Sandusky, Ohio, because it had 5 roundabouts in it. So it was great to see him talk about it, but he didn't mention it before, and he hasn't mentioned it since. So some of the things I think that could remedy this, obviously love to see Federal Highway create a rule that the roundabout be the preferred intersection type. So it has to be at least evaluated for every reconstruction or construction project for an intersection with federal funding. And New York, Alaska, and Virginia all have something similar, that a roundabout has to be, at least considered or evaluated for an intersection reconstruction or new construction. Then the proven safety countermeasures to reorganize those so that they're, that roundabouts just don't fall in an intersections category. And then that way, that vulnerable road user safety assessment guidance that they put out could actually be revised, and roundabouts could be part of a recommended treatment. Federal Highway and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration could actually promote roundabouts in a national education campaign. And the perfect time to do that would be during National Roundabouts Week. And I would hope that, I'm crossing my fingers, that maybe Secretary Pete could actually be part of that. That would be fantastic, considering, the message, the power of his message and the reach that he has would be fantastic for, roundabouts and road user safety in general. Finally, so looking at reorganizing proven safety countermeasures, what happens now is that all of the proven safety countermeasures, and we'll go here, this is on Federal Highway's website, you can see how they're all kind of divided into categories. And some of these, like road, you've got speed safety cameras and you've got speed limits. Really, those could benefit cyclists and pedestrians. And you have road diets here that could actually benefit speed management. And then of course you go down here for the intersections and you see roundabouts here. Well, roundabouts apply to speed management, they apply to pedestrian and cyclists. And you've got this cross-cutting category, which is supposed to kind of be across the, all across these different proven safety countermeasure categories, but yet you don't see roundabouts here. It's only in this one intersections piece. So you have a bunch of these and same with road diets, some of these others could be in this cross-cutting category, but they're not. They're kind of isolated in these various categories. So what you run the risk of is that, states could pass up on viable solutions because they're not in a certain category. And that could potentially even create a safety issue, because the state may not have picked the best choice because it wasn't in a certain category. based on that organization. So I think this is something that could be really simple, really quick to do, but it could have a huge impact in terms of, road user safety. So road user education, I think, the department should partner or should have the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration partner with other organizations and agencies to come up with a national road user education curriculum for elementary schools. Now that will be a huge lift. So in the meantime, I think state DOTs, education and public safety departments can do this at the state level to create a state curriculum, and then, create a program in their own states. And then when a national curriculum came around, it could be, they could modify to match it. And the best part about this is that funding exists in the Highway Safety Improvement Program to pay for education programs. So something like this could potentially get funding. And again, these programs, these are all across in the world. The European Union, every elementary school child has a road user safety education program as part of their curriculum growing up. And we just don't do this in the US. We do it on a sporadic basis. And this is something that could be, I think, extremely impactful if we were able to enact this, at least at the state level. And then looking at a uniform traffic code. The Uniform Vehicle Code right now, which basically governs all of the state traffic laws for states, there's this model set of traffic laws out there that all the states base their laws on. But when this was written, it had a heavy influence from the automobile industry, and pedestrians were added over time, basically as a way to regulate travel instead of providing equity of use. And now you have state laws that are no longer uniform because this code was last updated in 2000, but yet many of these laws are still based on this code. So now you have inconsistencies between states. And just to point that out, I just want to, an article I wrote last August, I kind of pointed this out. You have in Maine, my state, you have this law here: when traffic control devices are not in operation, an operator must yield the right of way to a pedestrian who's crossing within a marked crosswalk, or to a pedestrian who has shown visible intent to enter the marked crosswalk. So basically what that says is that if you see somebody who looks like they're attempting to cross either side of the road, it doesn't matter, you have to yield the right of way to them. But now you look at Florida, which uses the language from the Uniform Vehicle Code, and you see that, this is a little bit complex, but basically what this says is that if the pedestrian's on the same side of the road as the vehicle when they're crossing, the vehicle has to yield. But if they're on the opposite side of the road, unless that the driver considers that them to be crossing to the point where they're in danger of going to basically hit them, then they don't have to yield. So it's just, you've got two sets of laws now in two different states. And we kind of wonder why, people are saying, well, vehicles never yield to pedestrians. Well, the laws are inconsistent to the point where, nobody probably knows that, hey, you're in this state, say someone from Florida comes to, Maine for vacation or whatever, you're in this state, the state law is that if I'm crossing on this opposite side of the road, you need to yield to me. And they don't know that unless they actually look up the law or whatever to see it, or if there's a sign there pointing to it maybe, but that's not what they experience in Florida. So just that inconsistency, creates a safety issue. So, that's something I think that we really need to, we're looking at the Manual for Uniform Traffic Control Devices, but we also need to look at our state laws out there. So my thought is that I believe that, the secretary has the power to convene a committee with automakers, law enforcement, vulnerable road user advocacy groups, an advisory committee, essentially to start looking at ways to turn the Uniform Vehicle Code into a uniform traffic code and give vulnerable users that equity in those state laws and create that model so states could adopt that. And finally, we've got the AASHTO Green Book. This is the Bible for U.S. roadway design. It's the design standard for the national highway system in the U.S. by federal law. This includes the interstate highway system, also thousands of miles of major highways and roads that have vulnerable road users on them. They're using these. And by federal law, the Secretary has control over the national highway system design standards with cooperation from the states. And that basically means you've got AASHTO, which is the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. They basically are made up of representatives of all the state DOTs. So Secretary Pete has an influence here with this, with AASHTO. And AASHTO itself has now suggested an openness to change the Green Book as part of those first mover actions they committed to as part of that call to action. So this is a perfect opportunity for the Secretary and Federal Highway to kind of use that authority that they have in federal law to influence, that process and work with AASHTO to change the Green Book so it does have more equity for vulnerable road users and it is less vehicle centric. I've used this, this Green Book for my career. I'm no longer designing, but I did for 19 years. And, this Green Book was a daily part, of what I did, especially toward the later end of my design career. And my particular state really moved to adopt a lot of stuff in this Green Book, and some states have completely adopted it. So there's a major impact here. States can set their own standards and things, but a lot of them, if not adopting the Green Book outright, base a lot of their tables and a lot of their guidance around what is in this Green Book. So just by changing some things here, making things more equitable, putting more language in there about vulnerable road users could make a major impact in highway design across the United States, be it with a state DOT or even a municipality. So that's pretty much the end of what I've got to say. So again, I'm looking for a conversation. So happy to take questions or comments. So go ahead.
Kenzie, I see you have your hand raised.
Oh, that was a clapping. Now they animate in Zoom. Great presentation. But I do have a question because I'm always curious about, buy-in and implementation. So for reference, my work, we do a lot of safe systems work for surgery. And that requires basically telling surgeons, we need to slow down, we need to take pause points and go through like checklists and go through rules just to make sure that we're not missing anything so that we can make sure there are no preventable adverse events. It's really analogous to traffic because we're asking people to slow down at every crosswalk or to be more conscientious in every step. And so one of the things we encounter a lot is getting buy-in and getting consistent uptake. And that's just with a small group of surgeons but what are things that people are talking about for getting buy-in of the entire driving population?
Right. Well, I think that's where, you've got to start looking at standards, you've got to start looking at laws, you've got to start looking at things that really affect a massive population. But you've also got to look at local impact too. And that's why I really point to there are things we can do to affect the current population, and there are things we can do to affect the future population. I think road user education is one of those things that will have the greatest effect on the future population. Whereas if you look at some of the commitments that have been made by these first movers, that's where you're looking at, I think, an immediate impact. Like I said, with this potential for AASHTO to come on board, you could immediately, with the next iteration of the Green Book. I'm looking, it was 2018, so it's been about 5 years. So the last one I think was 2011 before 2018. So, we're coming up on another couple of years, we're going to see another version of the Green Book come out. And that's the opportunity to potentially change highway design across the country by just making some changes there. So, I think that's where you're going to get the buy-in, is you get these agencies and I think this effort now for this call to action and bringing all of these national companies and national agencies and things like that into play really will have a ripple effect across the country in terms of impact.
So Mackenzie, are you talking about buy-in from the traffic planning world or buy-in from the people who are driving vehicles?
Yeah, buy-in and behavior change, because people are used, especially, a lot of people who only drive and don't use roads in any other way. It amounts to a lot of behavior change on something that they do all day, every day, and getting that consistent.
Yeah.
Ian Walker had a great chat. He's done some research over in the UK, and he was on the War on Cars on a podcast recently, and it was fascinating, the social behavior aspect of it. Jonathan, you probably listen to it.
Yeah, from us, we're doing this work with surgeons, and surgeons think, your systems research says that people are fallible, but I could not be fallible. Now multiply that by millions of road users.
Everybody's a great driver, right?
Yeah.
Well,
I pointed out, one of the things I pointed out too is that I think, just as seeing the engineering side of it, that will naturally evolve as you see younger engineers and planners come up who have this. A lot of them don't drive cars. A lot of them,
Can I pause for just a second?
Things are vehicle centric, and they want to see a change for more equity. And you're going to see them as they grow further into their careers and get more power and influence in their careers. We're going to start to see a natural change, I think, of things. I think it's going to be one of these things where I don't think it's going to be instantaneous. It's just going to be, it's going to happen, but it's going to be over a period of time. Like most of the things I've seen in my career, some things can take like a decade or more to finally move in the right direction. As far as the traveling public goes, I think it's going to be the same thing. I think it's going to be your younger users, one kind of growing up with this idea. And like I said, hopefully that's where the road education piece can come in, because then you have behaviors that are learned at a very early age, and then they can carry that with them the rest of their adult life. But if they're not getting that, and they're not seeing that, you've just got another generation of adults who don't have that background information, and we can't move the needle. So
can I jump in real quick, Jonathan?
I'm having trouble hearing you because
somebody
somebody has their microphone or they're not on mute, and it's very distracting.
It might be Dave Lacey.
I don't know.
Okay, yeah. Could we ask folks?
I'm not sure.
There we go.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'd like to just continue this thought, because this is obviously this youth education has been a very important aspect for Jonathan's work here, and with Rick here. Rick, you had mentioned this in the chat. Would you like to speak to the idea of kids being educated about road use?
Yeah. So my colleagues, some of you listened to Vanilla Quinn talking about traffic gardens. And actually, we worked together. I was a principal investigator on the research project we did with DC Public Schools. And the idea was to put traffic gardens in with balance bikes or pedal bikes to a second grade bike program to create safety awareness for those students around the built environment, the transportation network. And so that was our effort to go into there. And I think you talked earlier about Philly has a great program. I know Alexandria, Virginia has one too. But this is, I think this is the age group you want to start building the healthy habits, right? That's the time where they start building that foundation. Believe it or not, in pre-K, because there's a fascinating study, a couple of them now, but there was one out of New Zealand with a professor, Christine Ergler. She looked at pre-K kids and how they saw the built environment. And if you're driven everywhere, that's what you see. You see driving, and you don't understand the built environment. But when they had a conversation and they looked at their area and talked about these other modes, the children understand, right? They get it. They understand there's other ways that they walk in their neighborhood, they bike in their neighborhood. So I think we need to, sort of like Jonathan said, we need to put in transportation, travel, or education, whatever you want to call it, into that pre-K through 12. I think it should be throughout that space, just to learn about the transportation network. What are your options? I mean, I grew up in Europe, so when I was in a lot of my early childhood, but also my my teen years, and I was able to get around walking, biking, and by transit. I didn't need to be driven anywhere. I had complete independent mobility, and so it's my mindset's a little bit different. But I think teaching kids about these options so they're aware, and then I think that'll make them a better driver. I haven't got all the research that says, yes, if I teach you how to bike and do a walk audit in school and I do these other things, that you're going to be a better driver. But I think we've seen that people that bike are more aware and people walk. So I think they're or at least they have more respect for people who are doing those things. That might be.
And that's the thing. Learning human vulnerability at an early age, and the fact that, everybody needs to understand that, the fact that, as a user, you need to watch out for other people, and you need to watch out for yourself, and that sort of self-care and awareness of others is really important, I think, in terms of roadway safety.
Yeah, I have 5 research subjects I work with a lot. They're called my granddaughters. So I impart this traffic safety wisdom on them all the time.
And I my son as well. I've told him every time, we come to a signal, we push the button. It's just things like that. So, Julie, you have your hand up.
Sorry, yeah. I was just kind of going to piggyback on what Mackenzie was saying about buy-in. I mean, I think obviously the education, starting them early, making it a part of their kind of lived experience and knowledge as they're growing up, so that they kind of have that built-in awareness and, they're conscious of it. But what I was going to say is, as it relates to kind of adults and as we get older, we become, I think, a little immune, or not immune, but like we become less aware. We've just been driving for so long. We just do it the way we do it. Right. And so one of my thoughts was, you were talking about how there could be some kind of a task force or some kind of a collaboration of minds, if you will, about the ways that we can promote, safety. As much as I would like to say that, everyone is always willing to do something out of the kindness of their heart, out of the their care for others. That's not always the case. And sometimes the way that you motivate people is by giving them something that they need. And so my thought was, as part of that kind of collaborative group, why not include insurance companies? I know they're in it for a profit, but at the end of the day, the result is the same. They're in it for a profit, but if the result is the same and we have more safety as a result of people being motivated to be safer, there are less accidents, meaning the insurance companies don't lose a lot of money, and there's safety, increased safety. And I think that if they were willing to offer some kind of, discount for a specific training class or some kind of refresher or something that you have to do as part of renewing your insurance, or as part of getting some kind of discount when you renew your insurance, I think people might be more motivated to, if they have an incentive, to do that refresher. And maybe it's a way to help remind them that it's important to be aware, and it's important to think about the safety of yourself and others when you're driving, and, just kind of as an effort to reduce, the accidents and that sort of thing. So I feel like sometimes buy-in, the only way you can get buy-in is to give people something they really want. And a lot of people will do it if there's a monetary incentive. So
it's interesting you mentioned the insurance companies, because the State Farm is actually one of the first movers as part of the call to action. So they've already been
That's great.
involved in this, so somebody like them might come to the table in terms of,
Yeah.
looking at something like, turning the uniform vehicle code into a uniform traffic code.
Right.
I'd like to, Eileen, if you don't mind me jumping in, you had a comment in the chat, and I just was wondering if you could kind of expand a bit. You said the most important people for any committee drafting laws is lawyers. Automakers and engineers should be excluded. Just kind of
Sure.
curious what your
Yeah.
thought, what your thinking is there.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'm not turning my video on because I have a broken arm and I can't set things up without shining a light in your face.
Ouch!
So-
Ouch!
Yeah. I was moving a recycling bin off the sidewalk and it pulled me and I fell.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Well, I'm glad you were able to persevere and join us today.
Yeah. Well, it's been a while. I'm recovering, but I feel okay. So I will say, as an ex-lawyer,
Mhm.
one of the things that I've been a member of the DC Pedestrian Advisory Council I was a member for 9 years. And I've seen various versions of the UBC and state laws. And one of the things that really struck me is that back in the day when the UBC was first put together, it was lawyers who did it. It was the state attorney generals of each state. And it's important that lawyers be involved and probably be in the lead, because traffic law is largely a matter of state law, and it's based on the state's police power and protection of health and safety. And those laws will vary state to state because you'll have different court decisions in different states, and some court decisions might be overcome by legislation, but some can't be. So getting a completely uniform code in every state is probably not doable. And you need the people in the states who know how to research the law and who understand. I don't want to be overly rude to the automakers and engineers, but there's a lack of understanding of principles like due process and equal protection among them. And it's not something they would or necessarily should know. I'm skeptical about engineers because I've seen what the engineers have drafted in terms of, the committee of the part of the NCUTCD that's been working on the UBC, and it's just, it's overly complicated. It omits a lot. And I think automakers just have a bias and probably shouldn't. I'm not saying exclude them from the process, but they should not be part of the committee. The committee, whatever committee is formed, should be open, transparent, public, and everyone should be able to participate. But the leads on it should be people who know how to craft law.
Yeah. I have no doubt that if Secretary Pete were to convene a committee, he would put the right people on it.
I hope so.
Yes.
I commented about this in my comments on the METCD too, because they raised the possibility of the UBC being taken over by FHWA.
Yeah,
So
that's
what was in my
interesting.
mind.
I know they're putting up an update. They're basically doing kind of a rules, a sort of a rules thing. I forget exactly what it's called, but basically just kind of a companion to the UVC, but not actually overwriting it.
Interesting.
A lot of it was based on the actual traffic control devices and not actual, the model laws in the UVC that just apply to general use. So, yeah, it's just that whole thing though, when I started looking at it and seeing the differences in the laws for people crossing the road was just enormous. And it's just, you wonder why, people are saying, well, why didn't that vehicle yield to me? Well, it's like, well, in my state, I don't have to do that. So
Well, Chris, also it's like, DC has changed its law 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
We were yield, we're stop. Now we have the, side, which side of the road you're on. But in all honesty, it's like, I don't think drivers pay all that much attention. You may have a few conscientious drivers that are trying to, do the right thing, but most of them, the ones who aren't yielding or stopping, they're just, they don't care.
Yeah. And I think that then it goes all back to the, kind of that early age thing where you put in the behaviors of, you're going to be somebody on a, wanting to cross the road sometimes. So
Right.
you're going to want someone to yield to you. So you really should yield to everybody else.
Yeah.
So it's just one of those things that kind of shared knowledge and just shared knowledge of vulnerability and access. Mackenzie. Oh, go ahead, Bill. Do you have something?
No, I'm just going to say it's 4:58.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So don't, no. Eileen, first of all, I want to thank you for bringing your perspective and thank you for being willing to jump into this question. I appreciate
Sure.
that.
Thank you for asking.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, Kenzie, we'll let you be the last question or comment, and then we'll wrap up.
Yep.
Okay, well, I'll keep it brief. I think that one of the interesting points is that a lot of this stuff hasn't been updated since the early 2010s at least. And what we've seen is even then with millennials and then Gen Z coming to adulthood is that a lot of us are just not driving as much as earlier generations are. And I'm really curious to see what the next iteration of these look like because of the intergenerational teaching, like you said, Rick, and because of people joining the force who are not necessarily drivers first. And I think that the changing landscape will have interesting implications.
Absolutely. All right. Well, a couple more things. Well, before we go here, we were talking about road user education. So we at Build the Era have our own road user education initiative, and it's called Rhonda Loves Roundabouts. This is going to be the first illustrated that we know of children's book about roundabouts and road user safety, featuring our own roundabout, created by Mackenzie Stratton. It's going to be both for children and adults. We're taking pre-orders up until the end of February. You can see there the price is $15 plus shipping, but no money is required up front for the pre-orders. And you can pre-order right here at buildtheera.com/roundaboutbook. And we're really excited about this. I'm really excited about this. We've worked with an extremely talented illustrator who's really brought, who's managed to take engineering and make it joyful and make it easy to understand. And it's just, what she's created is just art, beautiful art, and the mix of engineering combined. I haven't seen anything like it, and I'm so happy that I've been able to participate in such a project. So really looking forward to this, and we'll have more information for you obviously as we get closer to a release. But those pre-orders are available again at buildtheera.com/roundaboutbook. And our next presentation that we have coming up is a conversation with Greg Regan, who is the president of the Transportation Trades Department of the AFL-CIO. And we're going to be talking about how transportation workers' quality of life directly affects the goods and services that we all receive across the country. So that's going to be a great conversation. It's going to be at February 23rd at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. And you can RSVP at buildtheera.com. So just want to thank everybody for being here today and having a great conversation about road user safety in the US. And hopefully, again, we've got this National Roadway Safety Strategy. We're kind of still in its infancy, but just seeing all of the people respond to that call of action was very heartening, I think. And I think we now have an administration and we have an agency that are really serious about seeing this as a crisis, and wanting to do something concrete about it. So we'll look forward to seeing what's coming up, and maybe we'll do another one of these in 2024 to see where we're at in the strategy then. So thank you, everybody, and have a good night.
Thank you.